I'll be taking a funeral service a bit later today. A member of our parish died of COVID, and his wife selected a really interesting passage as our central reading for the service and for my sermon. And so I thought I would share it with you as well, because I've never heard this verse being used at a funeral before, but actually I think it's really apt and interesting. She chose Acts chapter 24, verse 15, and I'm going to read to you just the verse before and after it as well. So Acts 24, verses 14 to 16. This is Paul speaking in a trial with Felix. And he says the following. He says, "I admit that I worship the God of our ancestors as a follower of the way, which they call a sect. I believe everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets. And I have the same hope in God as these men themselves have, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. And so I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man." It's actually a very powerful tribute, or testimony rather, that Paul makes about what he believes. He says, "I admit that I worship the God." I admit, he declares his faith in this passage. And the verse that the widow whose funeral I'll be taking today selected was the passage about the resurrection, that we believe there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. Now this passage is part of a much longer testimony that Paul gives to Felix. He's under house arrest by Felix, and then he's passed over to another person, and then to another person, and eventually he is transported to Rome for his hearing. So he spends a number of years under house arrest under these various Roman rulers. And in the course of these times, he has either presents testimony in a more trial context, or he has a conversation with a Roman ruler. And so we learn quite a lot about Paul's thoughts in these last few chapters of Acts. This passage, I think, is really interesting because Paul speaks about his faith under duress in some way, because he is having to challenge or defend himself rather against the Jewish leaders. But also he treats this as an opportunity to witness about what he believes. And he shares with us really four key points of belief in these three verses. First is that he is a follower of the way, and the way is what Christians were referred to in those early days. They were called followers of the way, from the passage where Jesus says, "I am the way and the truth and the life." And so before they were called Christians, they were called followers of the way, and Christianity was referred to as the way. Secondly, he declares his belief in the First Testament scriptures, the first 5 books, the Law of Moses, and then the books of the prophets. And so he declares that these scriptures he still regards as the Bible. And in our modern language, what he's saying is that he regards the First Testament as part of the Christian Bible, and it's why we still have it here in our Bible today. The third thing that he says is that he has a hope in the resurrection. He believes that there will be a resurrection, and indeed there were groups of Jewish people in those days that did also believe that there would be a resurrection. Not all, but some. And then finally he says that he endeavors, therefore, he strives to keep a clear conscience with both God and humanity. And so he wants to be found faultless. He doesn't want people to be able to point fingers at him and say that he has done wrong things. But these seem to be 4 important values or parts of his faith. That he's a follower of the way, that he believes the scriptures, that he hopes in the resurrection, and that he strives to keep a clear conscience with God. Now the central verse that was selected for us today to reflect is the verse about the hope in the resurrection. And I think there's a couple of important points that we can learn from that, or take from that. And the first is this, that there is more to this life than this life. there are many people in our society who believe that this life that we live, for however many years we have, 60, 90 years, whatever it is that we have to live, is all there is. And so we have to make the best of it, because there was nothing before and there will be nothing after. So you've got to live the good life, because this is what God has given to us. And so there are many people, atheists, but also people who follow other religions, who believe that there is nothing else. There is no afterlife. And so this is the only one. But when we believe in the resurrection, which is the idea that we are brought back to life, to a new life, but still ourselves, but brought back into a new life, then we realize that there is more to life than just this life. And that death in this world, death in this life, is not final and finite. It's not the end of everything. It is a transition, if you want. But Paul also makes reference to something which we don't hear elsewhere in the scriptures, and that is that both the righteous and the wicked will be raised on that day. Both the righteous and the wicked. So it's not just that good people will be raised to enjoy eternity with God, but everybody will be raised back to life. And what that suggests is that what we do in this world matters. There is, in a sense, a continuity between this life and the next life. We shouldn't think of them as being independent of each other, but rather as being quite closely connected. And so, in a sense, we make investments in this world that will hopefully pay dividends in our resurrected life. So when Paul says that both the wicked and the righteous are raised, are resurrected, what that suggests is that we are all raised for judgment. And Jesus does speak about a day of judgment in which he will judge the human soul and separate the one from the other, the sheep from the goats. And it is based on our faith, and it is based on our actions that these judgments get made, as we learn in the gospel stories. And so because we are raised for judgment, Paul says that he strives to keep a clear conscience with God and with humanity. He recognizes that because there will be a judgment and that we will be raised to this judgment, it is really important that we maintain a good relationship with God in this life so that we can have a good relationship with God in the next life, and that it is important that we maintain good relationships, a clear conscience with other human beings in this life, because that will also impact on our next life. So the resurrection then becomes both a source of hope that this is not all there is, a hope that we can experience life again one day, and also a challenge, which is that there will be a judgment and a separating. And these together have quite significant implications for how we live our lives today. So what is it that Paul says we should then be doing in order to keep this clear conscience? I suggest as those first two things he says to us. The first is that he is a follower of the way. And so we are urged to follow the way of Christ, to live the life of Christ, to emulate him, to model ourselves on him, to learn from him, to mimic him even. But our pattern of behavior, that following, that step by step, the breathing breath by breath of our lives, should all be directed towards Christ, walking with his guidance behind us, walking in the way of him in the present moment, and walking towards him in the future. This is what the way means. It means everything, past, present, and future, is all part of how we live our lives moment by moment. And secondly, he says that we need to believe the scriptures. We need to read and think about this book that we call the Holy Bible. Not everything is easy. Not everything makes simple sense. Not everything seems immediately relevant. But everything in the scriptures is important for our growth and for our development of our relationship with God and for thinking about how we behave in the world. And so Paul, in a sense, in this passage, speaks about two key aspects of Christian living, and that's what we believe and how we behave. Both of these are important. Beliefs are important. Christianity is not just a moral framework, it is also a conceptual framework and a belief framework, how we understand the world and time, its creation, its God, and so on. It also is about our behavior. It's about how we engage, not just with our own family and with other Christians, but also with anybody in the world. And so it is about the generosity in which we come to the world. Both our beliefs and our behaviors are important and have eternal implications for us. All of this teaching really strikes home when you're at a funeral. When someone that you know and love passes away, particularly when they pass away prematurely, when they're still young and have decades of life ahead of them, you become aware of, you're forced to confront the fragility of this life that we have, how easily it can be snuffed out, and how precious it is while we have it. And so, dear friends, as much as we grieve during this time of COVID, and as much as many of us have lost more and more people to this disease, let us use that grief and let us use this confrontation with our mortality to think about what is most important to us, what's most important to God. What does God want from us? And this short passage from Acts 24, verses 14 to 16, in a sense encapsulates the heart of Paul's faith and could really provide us with some solid meat to nourish us in our own journey. And so I pray that God will journey with you, that he will journey with me, and that he will help us to follow the way of Christ. Amen.